Hi, everyone. Hopefully, you're having a great day. I'm Surita Bains. I'm the VP of Product Design here at MediaValet, and I'm really glad that you're here with us. So, we're going to be covering in the next 30 minutes is something that I hear almost every week from marketing leaders, creative ops teams, and content strategists. And that's about the gap they're having with getting the content that they have across their organization. So the shift that's happening right now isn't about making more content, it's about activating that content that you already have, getting it to the right people, the right tools, and at the right time. So let's get in. So like Ian mentioned, we're going to start with a poll because first we want to hear from you. And I promise we'll talk about this and reinforce this throughout the session. So the poll is you should be seeing it now. What is the biggest content operations headache that you have? Too much manual work, moving content between tools. Your tech stack just doesn't talk to each other. You've got off-brand or unapproved content, and that keeps slipping into the market. Obviously, that's not what you want. And also, we hear you've simply outgrown the processes that you may have started with as your organization, as things have evolved over time. So let's go see where the poll's coming in. A few more answers. I see we're at 68% participation. Amazing. We'll leave a couple more seconds, and then I'll show where we're at. We're at about 77%. So too much manual work moving content between tools at 53%. So the clear winner across the board. The second there is our tech stack doesn't talk to each other at 29%. We definitely hear that. At 12%, you've simply outgrown the processes that you've started with. And at 6% off-brand or unapproved content is slipping into market. So kudos to this team here. You're doing a great job on that one. Phenomenal. Well done. So let's start talking about the world that you live in. And that's most likely where, and you touched on this, content isn't in one place. It flows through things like your project management tool, your CMS platforms, your social schedulers, design systems, partner portals, the list goes on. Each of these tools solves a real problem, but the glue between them, that's almost always manual work. So what does that mean? Someone's downloading a file, renaming it, retagging it, re-uploading it into the next system or the next part of the chain. And that's happening over and over. When the manual handoff that we've just talked about becomes that bottleneck, the assets go out of sync and that metadata disappears. And then you spend and your team spends more time managing the file versus managing your campaign or your project. And that is definitely a problem. So Forrester really describes this well. They say that content is the fuel of digital experience ecosystems, and organizations must treat it as an operational supply chain, not a repository. And that's really the spot-on frame that I'm going to use today. So let's start with talking about content. It sounds really obvious. It's in everything that we do and talk about, but in practice, full concept of content sometimes gets missed. So, what does it actually mean in an operational context? Content is not just the asset, but it's the asset plus the metadata, the context, the rights, the expiry usage rules, and the distribution history. A file by itself is not content. A JPEG sitting in a folder is not content. Content is the asset plus all that metadata that gives it meaning and makes it usable. The metadata that describes it, the context for how it was created, the rights governing where it can go, expiry rules, and distribution history. That distinction really matters because a system of action doesn't just move a file, it moves the intelligence that makes that file usable. If you strip that metadata when a file moves from one tool to another, you haven't actually activated that content. You've just moved a file from one tool to another. So metadata is really what makes the content operational. It's that engine underneath everything else. Discoverability. Can people find the right asset? That's metadata. Automation. Can a workflow trigger based on content attributes? That's metadata. Personalization, we hear a lot more about that. Compliance, distribution logic, expiry enforcement, that's all metadata enforcement. So without it, again, that content can't move intelligently and it can't support automated workflows. Compliance becomes a very manual audit process, and none of this scales because it is so manual. And here's where we hear that organizations hit a wall, that even when that metadata exists in DAM, it stops there. The moment the content moves into a CMS or project management tool, all of that metadata stays behind. And that's where governance breaks down. This is not a people problem or even a process problem. It's an infrastructure problem. Your integration layer isn't carrying that intelligence with the content. A real true system of action moves the intelligence with the asset every time across every system. So let's take a second and zoom out and look at this through a bigger lens, through the content supply chain. Forrester calls the content supply chain the operational backbone of digital experience. And I'd very much agree with that framing. I'd add that for most organizations, that backbone has fractures. So the question isn't whether your organization has a content supply chain, because you do. The question is whether it's working or whether there's those manual handoffs and disconnected integrations are quietly killing your speed and your brand consistency and your team's energy. And this is where we hear and we see that it typically breaks down. Duplicate assets in multiple systems. You've got version confusion, so nobody knows where the most current file actually resides. You've got, again, that manual downloading and uploading, and this takes hours every week of people's time that they likely would like to be spending elsewhere. You've got workflow delays that push campaign timelines. And again, that brand risk because somebody at some point by human error is going to grab the wrong version where the brand's not compliant. These things here are not the exception. They are not the edge case. We hear about these almost every week when we talk to folks, regardless of industry or company size. So what's missing in this equation? Because it's clearly not more tools. Teams already have too many tools. It's not more content. It's actually connection. The gap isn't how the content is created or stored, it's how the content moves or fails to move intelligently between the systems where the work really happens. This is the shift that I want us to anchor on. So content management, right? That storage, the tagging, the retrieval, that problem is largely solved. People have solutions for that. That is working. The competitive advantage that customers have is activation. You want to make your content to power every stage of the workflow, not just the DAM stage. So what you're looking at here in this visual is MediaValet's DAM as a single source of truth. This is the center. But what you're looking at when you look at what's surrounding it is there's planning, creation, review, distribution. Content's flowing in and out bi-directionally at every stage along that content supply operational flow. The connector that makes this possible is something that we call Unify at MediaValet. You'll see it referenced at the bottom of the diagram, and we're going to spend the rest of this session unpacking what that actually means. But the short version is Unify is the integration layer that ensures your content and all the metadata and governance that makes it useful stays connected and synchronized at every step on that journey. Not just inside the DAM, but everywhere in your team's work. That's the idea we're building towards, and we'll come back to an example in practice of what that looks like. So I'll say this plainly again. Storage doesn't drive business value, and that problem is solved, but activation does. So the ROI on your DAM investment doesn't come from organizing your files more elegantly. It comes from how fast your team can get to the right asset in the right campaign at the right moment with that governance intact. That's the shift we're making, and it has a direct implication on how you should think about your integrations. Gartner also put it well, and they say that content must be orchestrated across systems to deliver value. So the organizations moving the fastest are not adding more tools. They're connecting the ones that they have. They're replacing these point-to-point integrations with an orchestration layer that makes the whole stack more intelligent. That's really the evolution from a collection of tools to a connected ecosystem. And here's the integration reality today for most organizations. That again, content is distributed. It's across platforms and teams and regions. And so integrations aren't optional. That's what makes a unified content strategy possible. But when your tech stack doesn't integrate, your content silos and workflow inefficiencies, these are not theoretical risks. They are the daily reality for teams operating with these fragmented stacks. The good news, when DAM is done right and those integrations are done right, that activates content where the teams are actually already working. It drives adoption, maximizes ROI, and accelerates those results. The key phrase in that is them done right, not just having an integration, but that integration ecosystem done in a robust manner. So let's get into the details of something before we move on. And I think it's really important to think about sometimes a vendor may show a really long list of integrations. So you'll see lots of logos in a slide or in a list, 100 or more sometimes. And the implication is that that's more value, right? The more you have, the better you're going to get. And I'd really push back on that concept because what matters is not how many integrations you have, but how deep they go. Whether those integrations actually carry that metadata when that content moves, whether it works in both directions, whether they hold up when that tool updates or a team scales. And these things happen all the time. So the difference between an integration that checks the box and is on the list versus an integration that actually changes how your team works. So if we look at the left-hand side here, this is what most organizations are still running on. And I want to be clear, it's not wrong. When these decisions were made, this all made sense. So they were one-way integrations for the most part. Typically, heavy IT involvement was needed, and they were isolated systems. That was what was available at the time. It got the job done, but it was slower, and this worked when we were in a more stable, slower world. But look at what it actually creates day to day. Somebody has to manually intervene every time that content needs to move. Your IT team needs to be involved in every connection and every update. And we all know that some third-party tools update much more often than others. So it's a lot of involvement from IT. The content is sitting in those silos because these systems don't talk to each other very well. And nothing is really synchronized. You're operating with some degree of version risk all the time. If we look at the right side, I'd like you to think back to those frustration points that we talked about in the poll at the beginning of the session. So we've got bi-directional integrations. That means that when a designer updates an asset in Adobe, it doesn't save locally, it syncs back to the DAM automatically. The same source of truth, the DAM, stays the source of truth. You've got no code and low code frameworks. That means that your marketing team can configure a workflow without filing a ticket with IT. And that's no small thing. That's really the difference between a team that moves at the speed of the campaign versus a team that's moving at the speed of the IT queue of your organization. Single source of truth. It isn't about just knowing where the file lives. It's about knowing that the file you're looking at is current, approved, and governed. Whether you're finding it in the DAM or in a project management tool or in Adobe or in your CMS, across the board. You've got complete control and visibility, meaning you're not flying blind. You know where the content has gone, you know who's used it, and you know whether it's still compliant. And then finally, active distribution. And that means content doesn't wait to be retrieved. It moves when it should. It goes where it needs to go. Automatically, less manual intervention across the board. So that's the shift from a system of record to a system of action. Not just integrations, but better ones. So I want to talk briefly about why this integration layer is so important to you, because we think this is what's really important to everything downstream from your single source of truth. You're going to have faster integrations. That means your team's not waiting months every time you need to add a new tool to your stack. Lower maintenance. So you're not firefighting every time something changes upstream. You've got real-time updates, and that means content and metadata stays in sync automatically. So no manual uploads, no version drift. That workflow continuity and cross-team connectivity, they're really two sides of the same coin. So your team stays in the tools they already know and they're already in, and the content is the one that moves intelligently between those tools without anyone having to manage it. These things all, they're not aspirational. These are baseline that a modern integration layer delivers. And this is what makes the next slide here possible. So through the years, DAM has evolved through some distinct phases. We're really taking a big picture view here. It started with digital libraries. That's basically organizing file storage. Then it moved more to a repository with more sophisticated tagging and retrieval. Then to a platform with workflow capabilities. This next phase, where the market is heading right now, is the system of action, where content doesn't just sit in a managed state waiting to be retrieved. It flows, it activates, it powers workflows across every tool your team uses with governance intact across every step of the way. So let's step out of the abstract for a minute and talk through what this looks like on any given Tuesday or Wednesday day of the week that you want to imagine. So in this example, think about a marketing manager. They're kicking off a new campaign. Here's how it plays out in a connected ecosystem. And I want you to also notice how some of the things we've talked about already do not actually appear in this scenario. So you've got your marketing manager and they're planning something in Monday.com, but you can insert whatever project management tool of choice that you want to think about. So right there in that Monday board, they pull inspiration from the DAM using an asset picker. These assets and their metadata are synced into that specific project automatically. No downloading, no re-uploading, no email chains at all. So then, maybe later that day, the designer picks up that brief in their project management tool in Monday, and then they go into Adobe Creative Cloud, they looked at inspiration, and they do their actual work. Any changes they make in Adobe are syncing back to the DAM automatically. The source of truth stays the same. Nobody has had to manage that manually at all. So then assets go through the review and approval process in the DAM. Once they're approved, you're going to have your next step that your web designer is in Drupal and pulls those in directly, metadata included all along the way. They're going to build that campaign landing page. No version confusion, no, is this the right file? None of that back and forth. Then that campaign's going to launch, and then your marketing manager can see in the DAM which assets are actually driving the most campaign views. That whole loop is connected from the brief at the plan stage to distribution and measurement at the end. So what did I not mention there? What didn't happen? There's no manual handoffs. There's no metadata getting lost in transit. No one's getting an outdated version. What we just covered, this is not a best case scenario. This is just the default for a system of action. This is your baseline expectation or what it should be. And this plays differently depending on who you are in the organization. So if you're an everyday creator, you're working in the tools you already know with DAM assets available right there, and there's no context switching. If you're in marketing, you have that single source of truth for your campaign assets. You've got the confidence that every output is on brand and current. If you're in creative ops, you get that automated handoff. There's much fewer manual steps, and you've got a system that moves the content into the channels at the moment it's already approved. So Unified doesn't ask anyone to change how they work. It makes the tools that they're already in work smarter. So let's take a moment here and also be practical because I know integration layer can sound really abstract. So think about the last time your team had to connect a new tool to your DAM. Typically, when that happens, someone has to scope that, they have to build it, and they have to test it. 6 months later, maybe that tool is updated, and then something is broken. And then you have to do it all again. And this cycle is really eating their team's time. The reason that this happens a lot of the time is those integrations are typically built from scratch for every single scenario, every time, and they're single purpose. There's no shared foundation. So what changes when you have reusable building blocks? These are common components for finding an asset, uploading an asset, mapping metadata. These common components work and they compound instead of repeat. So the first integration builds on this framework. Everyone after goes faster and stays consistent because we're using these reusable building blocks. This same logic applies to visibility. Most teams have little or no idea what's happening to the content once it's left the dam. Which version went where, whether it's synced, whether something's broken. Centralized logging. This isn't a demo feature. It saves you at 4 p.m. on a Friday when the campaign is live and something's wrong. You really need those logs. So none of this is about the technology being impressive. It's about your team spending less time on the plumbing and more time on the work that actually matters. And that's really the foundation that we've built Unify on, is that concept. So think about how your team currently thinks about DAM. And they probably describe it as a place where the content lives. That's where it exists. That's where the files are stored. And that's where you go to find these things. And we're suggesting that that framing is quite limited. We see that the organizations that get the most impact from DAM aren't treating DAM as a place, they're treating it as infrastructure. The same way you treat your CRM or your cloud storage, it's not a destination, it's a foundation. So that's exactly the shift Unify is designed to enable. Integration first, connected to real workflows, and built for what's coming next. So the organizations that we think are going to win in the next phase of content operations share three things. They activate content everywhere, not just in the DAM, but in the everyday tools that their teams are already using. They've got connected ecosystems. That replaces fragmented manual workflows with intelligent integration. And then they treat DAM as infrastructure, not just another piece of software. But it's the connective layer, the connective tissue, if you think about, that makes the entire content strategy work. So the question has really changed. It's not where do we store our content? It's how does our content power every system our team relies on already? The organizations that answer that question well, we think that's where the real competitive advantage lives. So thanks so much for spending the time with us today. We really appreciate it. If what we've talked about resonates with you, if you're dealing with manual handoffs and fragmented integrations, content that's not governed once it left the dam, feel free to reach out. I would love to have the conversation. And now we'll open it up to questions. I haven't looked at the chat, so maybe I can do that now. And Ian, you can maybe prompt me if you think there's any good questions we can tackle.
Perfect. There was one I saw come in with the Q&A section, Sarita. It was
Maybe read
what? Oh, you got one. You got one. You see on your end. I see one for
No, I don't. Happy to hear it.
what patterns are you seeing from customers that most influence kind of where the product is headed next?
Yeah, okay, good question. Speed is huge. So the speed of content. So customers are looking for things to move just much more faster than ever before. And so that influences where the product is headed for sure. Is just that velocity, if you think about it that way. Another is you can't get away with a webinar without talking about AI. So the influence and the impact of AI. There's more content generated by AI. And so how is that managed? But also, how is AI used to modify content, intelligently connect systems? We very much hear and see that. Answer questions about content as well. So a lot of that is coming in as a massive pattern. Um, and then maybe because I like threes, personalization. So this is not something new, but the degree of which things are personalized and the granularity is definitely something that we're hearing more about. So increasing that content personalization for the scenario, the person, the audience, that's definitely an increasing pattern. And I think that ties a little bit back to the AI of what's possible and the direction that people are heading.
Okay, nice. We have another question in from Sarah. Are there any plans to integrate MediaValet with more downstream platforms instead of the open AI?
Yes, we've got lots of plans for lots of downstream integrations. So I would just broadly say yes. Love to hear from you, Sarah, specifically, what you're interested in and why. But that's definitely something that we're looking at.
Excellent. I think that covers us there, Sarita. I think we're just almost at the 10:30 mark, but unless there's anything else coming in from the crowd, yeah, thanks so much for joining us, everybody, today. And Sarita, thank you so much for presenting. It was very informational.
Happy to do it. Happy to see everyone and talk to everyone today. And this is a value. Like I said, please reach out if you want to talk more.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers,
Bye bye.
all.